Good day! Welcome to 21st Century Literature from the Philippines and the world. And also, welcome back students after PFA modules. Here we are in our literary lessons. Have you ever asked, what do I need to know in this subject? This lesson was designed and written with you in mind. It is here to help you understand 21st century literature from the Philippines to the world. The scope of this lesson permits it to be used in many different learning situations. The language used recognizes the diverse vocabulary level of all students. Here, the lessons are arranged to follow the standard sequence of the course about geographic, linguistic, and ethnic dimensions of Philippine literary history from pre-colonial to the contemporary, and also identifying representative texts from the different regions of our country. So here are the first two lessons that we will be going to take up in week 1 and week 2 in this subject. And after going through this lesson, you are expected to be able to do the following objectives. First, identify geographic, linguistic, and ethnic dimensions of Philippine literary history from pre-colonial to contemporary and representative texts from the regions. Second, write a close analysis and critical interpretation of literary texts. Third, show a sense of adaptability of the Philippine literary history. Here we are. Let's begin Lesson 1, entitled Philippine Literary History from Pre-Colonial to the Contemporary. First, I want you to think about our history. While looking at the picture at the right, reminisce your previous learnings on Philippine history. And now, what is the picture that you are seeing at the right? Yes, you're right. This is the Philippine Baybayin, or what we call Alibata. What's the story behind our alphabet? Our forefathers already had their literature, which reflected in their customs and traditions. They had their alphabet even before they had been colonized. The Spanish friars burned their alphabet in the belief that they were works of the devil or were written on materials that quickly perished, like the barks of trees, dried leaves, and bamboo cylinders, which could not have remained firm even if efforts were made to preserve them. Our unique geographic location is the reason why we are rich and varied. So that might be the reason why our Alibata is no longer the alphabet that we are using as of today to write our names, to write paragraphs, to write letters, and many more. Let us begin in the pre-Spanish literature or the pre-Spanish period, and let us find out what kind of literature or literary pieces do we have at this point of time. In the pre-Spanish period, our literature are the following: the folktales, the epic age, and the folk songs. Let us go one by one on each literary pieces. Let's talk about folktales. These are made up of stories about life, adventure, love, horror, and humor, where one can derive lessons about life. An example of this is The Moon and the Sun. Folktales in Tagalog is also called Kwentong Bayan. Second one, the epic age. Epics are long narrative poems in which a series of heroic achievements or events, usually of a hero, are dealt with at length. Example is Biag ni Lamang. From the word itself, these long narrative poems are talking about heroines or heroes as the main character of the story. And lastly, folk songs. These are one of the oldest forms of Philippine literature that emerged in the pre-Spanish period. These songs mirrored the early forms of culture. Many of these have 12 syllables. Let's see the examples. Kundiman, Kumintango Tagumpay, Ang Dalit o Imno, Ang Oyayi o Hele, Diana, Soliraning, and Talindao. Next, let's move on the Spanish period. Let's see what kind of literature is here. Literature in this period may be classified as religious prose and poetry, and secular prose and poetry. We have here the Spanish influences on Philippine literature. What are those influences? The first Filipino alphabet, called Alibata, was replaced by the Roman alphabet. Also, The teaching of the Christian doctrine became the basis of religious practices. European legends and traditions brought here became assimilated in our songs, corridos, and moromoros. Many things have been the influence of the Spanish era, beginning from the alphabet being changed from the Baybayin into the Roman one. And also, the greatest influence of the Spanish era is our religious practices. Even the way of writings, the traditions that we have also been brought to us by the Spaniards to assimilate in our different literary pieces. Next, we have folk songs. It manifests the artistic feelings of the Filipinos and shows their innate appreciation for and love of beauty. The examples are Leron-Leron Sinta, Pamulinawin, Dandansoy, Sarong Banggi, and Atin Ko Pong Singsing. I bet you are all familiar with these folk songs. Let us have recreational plays. There are many recreational plays performed by Filipinos during the Spanish times. Almost all of them were in a poetic form such as Senaculo, Panunuluyan, Salubong, and Zarzuela, and some of these are still practiced up to these days. How about in the period of Enlightenment, from 1972 to year 1898? In 19th century, Filipino intellectuals educated in Europe called Ilustrados began to write about the hitch of colonization. In the period of Enlightenment, there began the propaganda movement dated 1872 to 1896. This movement was spearheaded mostly by the intellectual middle class like Jose Rizal, Marcelo del Pilar, Graciano Lopez Zahaina, Antonio Luna, Mariano Ponce, Jose Maria Panganiban, and Pedro Paterno. Can you still remember them in our history? I bet you do. Let us see some of their writings that urge Filipino spirit. Some of these are No Limitangere, El Filibusterismo, Mi Ultimo Adios, Sobre la Indolencia de los Filipinos, and Filipinas dentro de 100 años. Excellent, right? How about Del Pilar's writings? He has Pag-ibig sa Tinubuong Lupa or Love of Country, Kaingat Kayo or Be Careful, and Dasalan at Toksohan, Prayers, and Jokes. And lastly, we have from the group, Haina, Ang Fray Botod, La Hija del Fraile or The Child of the Friar, Everything is Hambug or Everything is Mere Show, Sa Mga Filipino, 1891, and Talumpating Pagunita kay Columbus or An Oration to commemorate Columbus. Next, let's move on to the American regime dated 1898 to 1944. Linguistically, Americans influenced Filipino writers to write using English language. And the characteristics of literature during this period are as follows. The languages used in writing were Spanish and Tagalog, and the dialects of the different regions. But the writers in Tagalog continued in their lamentations on the conditions of the country and their attempts to arouse love for one's native tongue, and the writers in English imitated the themes and methods of the Americans. Though we were civilized and educated in the era of the American regime, still Filipinos and some of our writers still write in the language of Spanish and Tagalog. However, those who can write in English imitated the themes and the styles and the techniques of the Americans, which as of now or until our time here, stateside is still relevant. Also, in this era, Jose Garcia Villa became famous for his free verse. Next, let's go to the Japanese period, dated 1941 to 1945. Between 1941 to 1945, Philippine literature was interrupted in its development when another foreign country, Japan, conquered the Philippines. Philippine literature in English came to a halt. Except for the Tribune and the Philippine Review, almost all newspapers in English were stopped by the Japanese. We all know that Japanese are not into English. And in these times or in this era that we are living in, Japanese seek tutorials in English so they can speak well of the English language. During this period, we were stopped, or the country was stopped to write in English, except for the different newspapers. Examples are the Tribune and the Philippine Review. The characteristics of literature during this period are as follows. The common theme of most poems during the Japanese occupation was nationalism, country, love, and life in the barrios, faith, religion, and the arts. So that's how the literary pieces in the Japanese era are being written. During the Japanese era, three types of poems emerged. These are haiku, tanaga, and karaniwang anyo. First, haiku, a poem of free verse that the Japanese liked. It was made up of 17 syllables divided into 3 lines, or basically composed of 5 on the first line, 7 on the second line, and on the third line is another 5. Next is tanaga, Filipino poem like the haiku, which is short, but it had measure and rhyme. It has 4 lines with 7 syllables, each with the same rhyme at the end of each line. And lastly, karaniwang anyo, or the usual form or conventional way of how Filipinos write their poem. How about the Philippine literature in English? Because of the strict prohibitions imposed by the Japanese in the writing and publishing of works in English, Philippine literature in English experienced a dark period. For the first 20 years, many books were published both in Filipino and in English. While in the new Filipino literature, Philippine literature in Tagalog was revived during this period. Most themes in the writings dealt with Japanese brutalities, the poverty of life under the Japanese government, and the brave guerrilla exploits. So even though we were given a halt by the Japanese to write in English language, it is also good because we can write our literary pieces in Tagalog or in our very own mother tongue. And still, seeking for freedom, writings were dealing with the brutalities of the colonizers. Let's proceed to the period of activism, year 1970 to 1972. According to Posciano Pineda, youth activism in 1970 to 1972 was due to domestic and worldwide causes. Because of the ills of society, the youth moved to seek reforms. This became the literary revolution. The youth became vocal with their sentiments. They demanded a change in the government. It was manifested in the bloody demonstrations and the sidewalk expressions, but also in literature. This was the beginning of time when youth's voices are being heard, not only by rallying in the sidewalks, but also through pen. Next, the period of the New Society, 1972 to 1980. The period of the New Society started on September 21, 1972. The Carlos Palanca Awards continued to give annual awards. Poems dealt with patience, regard for native culture, customs, and the beauties of nature and surroundings. Newspaper donned new forms. News on economic progress, discipline, culture, tourism, and the like were favored more than the sensationalized reporting of killings, rape, and robberies. Filipinos before were hooked in reading magazines and comics. In the period of the New Society, writings of poems continued, as well as the new phase of news, wherein good news is much favored than the bad news. Next, period of the Third Republic on 1981 to 1985. After 10 years of military rule and some changes in the life of the Filipino, which started under the New Society, martial rule was at last lifted on January 2, 1981. The Philippines became a new nation, and this former President Marcos called the New Republic of the Philippines. Poems during this period of the Third Republic were romantic and revolutionary. Many Filipino songs dealt with themes that were true to life, like those of grief, poverty, aspirations for freedom, love of God, and country and fellow men. Those were now the topics in the literary pieces after being under the martial rule. Next, Post-Edsa I Revolution, 1986 to 1995. History took another twist. Once more, the Filipino people regained their independence, which they lost 20 years ago. In 4 days from February 21 to 25, 1986, the so-called people power or lakas ng bayan prevailed. In the short span of the existence of the real Republic of the Philippines, several changes already became evident. It was noticed in the new Filipino songs, newspapers, speeches, and even in the television programs. The now crony newspapers that enjoyed an overnight increase in circulation were the Inquirer, Malaya, and the People's Journal. Here's what happened to the literature in the Post-Edsa I Revolution, wherein newspapers are now a good friend and companion, especially the Inquirer, Malaya, and People's Journal, which are still being used until today. And now, last but not the least, 21st century period. Today, the new trends have been used and introduced to meet the need and tastes of the new generation. 21st century learners are demanded to be ICT inclined to compete with the style and format of writing as well. New codes or lingos are used to add flavor in the literary pieces produced nowadays. This has been the millennial or the Generation Z type of literary pieces that they want to read, especially those lingos, those codes, or form of language that they love to use, whether it is on ICT or in the hardbound type of literary pieces. What have you learned? We're almost done. Let us have a recap of this lesson. First, pre-Spanish literature is characterized by legends, folktales, the epic age, and the folk songs. Second, the propaganda movement was spearheaded mostly by the intellectual middle class like Jose Rizal, Marcelo del Pilar, Cristiano Lopez Jaina, Antonio Luna, Mariano Ponce, Jose Maria Panganiban, and Pedro Paterno. In the American regime, Americans influenced Filipino writers to write using the English language. English as a medium of instruction was introduced in the schools as the intellectual language of education. In the period of activism, campus newspapers were written to show their protest. They held pens and wrote on placards in red paint the equivalent of the word makibaka or to dare. In the period of the new society, poems dealt with patience, regard for native culture, customs, and the beauties of nature and surroundings. Next, the period of the Third Republic was romantic and revolutionary. Post-Edsa I noticed in the new Filipino songs, in the newspapers, in the speeches, and even in the television programs. Hooray for today! That is the end of Lesson 1. You may now start doing activities and tasks assigned to you for this lesson. Hi! Are you done with Lesson 1? Now, let us proceed to the 21st century literature from the Philippines and the world's Lesson 2. Let us have first a review. Answer the following questions for the previous lessons. What are the different literary periods in the Philippine literature? Can you still remember? Excellent! What are the basic elements of the literary pieces under the Japanese regime? How about on American period? And how about on the Spanish period? Great! Number 3. What are changes in literature during the 21st century? Nice! I think you are ready for Lesson 2. Our class objectives for today. At the end of the lesson, you are expected to A. Identify representative texts and authors from the regions of the Philippines. B. Write a close analysis and critical interpretation of literary texts through imagery. C. Show a sense of reflection on the Filipino texts in confronting socio-political and moral issues of the country. I hope that is clear, and let us begin. Our lesson for today is identifying representative texts and authors from the regions of the country. Let us have a short introduction. The country's rich repertoire of literary masterpieces may be rooted in the diverse cultural heritage of the Filipino people. They have produced varied texts because of differences. The mighty roar of the North and to the fiery temperament of South blended well. The Filipinos speak of the collective experiences from the people who have gone through difficulties, triumphs, struggles, successes, armed conflicts, bloodless revolutions, and others. It is the reason why these masterpieces resonated loud and clear in the Philippine archipelago. Let us have a taste of Philippine poetry. Let us begin at the first region, which is Luzon. Located in the northwest of Luzon, the Ilocos region or Region 1 is comprised of 4 provinces, namely Ilocos Norte, Ilocos Sur, La Union, and Pangasinan. It is bordered to the west by the turbulent South China Sea, to the east by the Cordillera Administrative Region, the northeast and southeast by Cagayan Valley, and the south by Central Luzon. Most of the inhabitants of the Ilocano homeland are concentrated along a narrow coastal plain. Because of geographical boundaries, these people often experience heavy rains and violent typhoons, especially during rainy seasons. We all know that. A moment of silence. Let us have one literary piece from someone in Region 1. Gabu is the title of this piece. It depicts a coastline in Ilocos that is constantly experiencing the battering restlessness of the sea. The water that comes back to the shore seems furious and ruthless with its day-long bashing, which havocs the wasteland. Being an archipelagic country, the Philippines knows the importance of water in the sea. How about the taste of Tagalog essay? More popularly known as the Calabarzon, referring to the provinces of Cavite, Laguna, Batangas, Rizal, and Quezon. Region 4A is home to Tagalog-speaking people in the Philippines, recognized all over the country for their bravery and fearlessness in battles. Calabarzon has participated actively in the country's fight for freedom and democracy. It is home to many Philippine heroes, foremost, and among them are Rizal of Laguna, Mabini of Batangas, and Aguinaldo of Cavite. Let's have a taste now of creative non-fiction from the region of Visayas. The island of Visayas is one of the major geographical divisions in the Philippines, the other two being Luzon and Mindanao. Visayas is divided into Western, Central, and Eastern. The Visayas region is comprised of several islands circling the Visayan Sea. Its people, therefore, share a sea-based culture and tradition that may be rooted in a strong religious foundation. The dwelling place of many festivals such as the Ati-Atihan, Dinagyang, Sinulog, Pintados, and Maskara. The Visayas may indeed be considered as one of the cradles of Philippine civilization. Let us have some examples of literary pieces and some authors from the different regions of the Philippines. Here, we are talking about the most remarkable, the most well-known from the very past. Let's have Doctrina Christiana. It was an early book of Roman Catholic Catechism, written in 1593 by Fray Juan de Plasencia, and is believed to be one of the earliest books printed in the Philippines. Yes, indeed, it is the first book printed in the Philippines, written by a friar whose picture is here. Let's have Ilocos region. Some other writers aside from the ones mentioned earlier is Francisco Lopez. In fact, the earliest known written Iloco poems were the romances he translated from Spanish. He is also an Augustinian friar in 1621 who published his own Iloco translation of the Doctrina Christiana, which is the first book to be printed in Iloco. Another one from Ilocos region, Leona Florentino. She is considered by some as the national poetess of the Philippines. She also wrote Nalpay Anamnama o Naunsyaming Pag-asa or Blasted Hope. She is a Filipino poet in the Spanish and Ilocano languages. She is also considered as the mother of Philippine women's literature and the bridge from oral to literary tradition. She is into writing and empowerment to women. Another pride of Ilocos region, Pedro Bucaneg. He was a Filipino poet who is blind since birth, and that did not stop him from making literary pieces. He is also the father of Ilocano literature. He is the acknowledged author of the Ilocano epic we all know, Biag ni Lamang. Let's proceed on Region 2. Do you know Ines Taccad Cammayo? She is a prize winner for her literary pieces. She had her first prize for People of Consequence in the Don Carlos Palanca Memorial Awards for Literature in 1970. She had second prize for Tears Melancholy Focus Literary Contest in 1979 and another second prize for On Friends You Pin Such Hopes. Another Don Carlos Palanca Memorial Awards for Literature in 1973. Another one from Region 2 is Fernando Maramag, an excellent poet and journalist in English. He had a rich style and deep understanding of human nature. He also wrote the poem, The Rural Maid. Let's move on to Region 3. Anicio Pascual. He wrote Juan Manalaksan, and Pascual is from Arayat, Pampanga, and this story that he wrote is something he has heard from an old Pampangan woman. From Region 3 as well, Macaria Garcia. She did not write these stories, but she narrated them. Those are So Juan, the Good Guesser, and So Anne's Good Luck. Let's proceed to Region 4. Reyes and Rizal. Manuel Reyes from Rizal narrated So Anne Eken. On the other hand, Jose Rizal wrote Legend of Maria Makiling aside from Noli and Elfili. Region 5, Mariano Perfecto. He is believed to be the father of Bicol literature, and he published also the first Bicol newspaper, ang Para Bareta or the Newsman. Still in Region 5, Merito B. Espinas. He wrote the story Ibalon. The story talks about 3 stories of Bicol heroes, or seems to be an example of epic. Region 6, Western Visayas literature. This literature is also called the Panayanon literature and known for the myth Tungkong Langit and Alunsina. Here in Western Visayas, the paktakon is a riddle, while they call proverb puro baton. Region 7, Vicente Sotto. He is the father of Cebuano literature. He also wrote the first written Cebuano literature entitled Maming. Region 8, Clodualdo del Mundo. He wrote the poem Ang Kanyang Mga Mata. Let's proceed to the National Capital Region or NCR. Some examples of short stories and poems. First, by Estrella Alfon, Magnificence. Footnote to Youth by Jose Garcia Villa. And some poems by Nick Joaquin, Happy Never After and The Martyr. That's all for today. Is everything clear so far? Those are all the literary pieces and famous authors who were remarkable in their own unique ways in the Philippine literature. Thank you for joining today's class. If you have questions, kindly message your teacher through the contact details provided. Enjoy learning, students. God bless you. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Bye!